So for those of you here in the US or North America, good morning. If anybody's calling in from outside North America, I guess it would be either good afternoon or good evening. Welcome to today's ONUG webinar titled Model-Driven Telemetry and Low-Code Automation Power Responsive Networks for Hybrid Multi-Cloud Migration. So it's a very interesting and relevant topic for the ONUG community. I'm Steve Collins. I serve as the working group CTO for ONUG, which means I'm very involved in the work that's going on in several different areas related to defining kind of a set of use cases and supporting requirements for various aspects of hybrid multi-cloud migration. And this topic is actually directly relevant to the issues that the ONUG community is dealing with. So it'll be interesting, interesting webinar here. Let's move on to the next slide. And so the agenda here is we're going to talk about hybrid multi-cloud deployments. And the good news is we have a couple of Anuta Networks customers online that are going to talk about their experience in this area. Going to learn a little bit about what Anuta Networks does, what their solution is all about, and what the operational experience the two customers have had with the product. And we will have time for Q&A at the end, hopefully maybe about 10 minutes or so. If you have questions, feel free to ask them at any time. Just go to the Zoom dashboard, go to the Q&A tab, and you can enter your question. We'll track those as they come in, and then we'll have a session at the end. Let's move to the next slide. So I just want to set the stage here. If we look at hybrid multi-cloud infrastructure, right? This is the types of systems and software we're going to be all migrating to, whether it's the service providers, the enterprises, the leading web scalers are already there. And I think everybody recognizes the power of this type of infrastructure, all the benefits that will accrue over time. But the other side of this, the flip side of it is it also introduces a lot of complexity. And that sort of manifests itself in a number of different dimensions. It's just a fundamental issue of scale. The fact that stuff is really very multi-layer in nature. It crosses multiple domains. You have kind of a high degree of distribution of workloads and systems and networks. Of course, everything's been disaggregated, right, into various hardware and software components and different planes and different layers. And the whole thing is very dynamic. So there's a lot of complexity, and that translates into cost, right? And so that's what this webinar is all about, is how can we tackle this complexity? And one of the real fundamental keys here is automation. Next slide. So I think at the end of the day, we're all going to be looking for a model here for hybrid multi-cloud automation that kind of follows what I have here in this diagram. We've got systems here. We're going to be instrumenting them, being able to pull metrics from that instrumentation using telemetry mechanisms, collecting that, putting it into repositories, performing analytics on that data, and doing that hopefully in real time so that we can monitor the state of the infrastructure. And if there's a change to that state, we can feed that into an orchestration system, and the orchestration system can react appropriately, which usually translates into some type of control or reconfiguration of the underlying infrastructure. And so this is kind of the model we want to work towards. We're going to work towards this model, I think, in sort of different aspects of that infrastructure, whether it's the application level, the network level, sort of the systems or IT ops level, and then even at the security level. So ultimately, this model is going to kind of be pervasive across the entire infrastructure. So with that, I just wanted to kind of set the stage a little bit. This is all directly relevant to what we're going to be discussing on this call. Let's move on to the next slide. So I'd like to introduce the panelists today. We have Peter Uffenholz, and he is VP of Virtualized Network Services at Tata Communications. We have Matt Wilson, who's the Director of Network Engineering at Neustar. And we have Praveen Vengalam, who's the VP of Engineering at Anuta Networks. And the format here is we're going to have both Peter and Matt talk about the challenges they faced in their environments, kind of what drove them to look at various automation solutions and what their experience has been and what they've learned deploying Anuta Networks. And Praveen will participate in that discussion as well. Let's move on to the next slide. And at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Peter and let him describe what he's done at Tata Communications. Peter?
Yes, thank you, Stephen. Hello, Peter Uffenholz, Tata Communications, and for those who are not familiar with Tata Communications, I just wanted to give you a very quick overview. These days we are describing ourselves as a digital transformation provider for enterprise services with the backdrop of all those hybrid cloud and connectivity moves that we also highlighted earlier as the backdrop of the changes in our industry. So our target is to assist our customers in their digital transformation journey in various aspects, everything from network to through security and UCC services, etc., that are required for customers to stay relevant, to have a competitive edge in deploying technology that is agile and future-proof, as well as making onboarding new technology, de-risking that for customers as much as we can. We have a history of being an internet service provider and a PLS service provider for many, many years, and have done so on a global scale. We are an Indian company, however, have significant assets outside of India, actually employ equally people across the globe, and have a global customer base with slightly more revenues actually achieved outside of India than in India. And we have serviced global MNCs for a very long time, 15 years or so, with everything from connectivity to SD-WAN services, security, etc. More recently, or I think our engagement goes now back almost 4 years with Anuta, and I think the deployment is now 3 years in place that we have onboarded Anuta to help us with hybrid WAN services in general, SD-WAN in particular, our SD-WAN Prime service, which is allowing for some path selection and congestion management options on standard Cisco routers. So that was a project that we had built in parallel to Cisco IWAN with the advantage not to require any overlay tunnels on the MPLS side and limiting the overhead that is transmitted on a network communication to basically B2B communities and some other protocols that are not very heavy. We have since then onboarded additional SD-WAN technologies. We have a Versa offering in the market. We also are in the process of launching a Cisco-based service for the Viptela variant of the product. So now our key issue for the automation that we faced was to cut down in those days on the delivery times and to reduce the error rates that we had. Delivery times as in working with multiple, well, not just in a multi-network and multi-service environment, but configuring complex scenarios on routers. We had up to, I think, 400 individual CLI commands that had to go into routers to get them ready for our service. And so the time to deliver a service and the possibility of errors was relatively high. Yes, we scripted a lot, but those scripts were limited to, well, the mastering of the scripts was limited to the people that actually wrote them, and then it still depended on basically manually injecting certain information for the proper configuration. So, and that was the onset for the discussions that we had, how we can automate it and can build from there with Anuta's help. And we went through the diligence process, looked at different options, and did a market survey of vendors in that field. And Anuta was ultimately the choice that we came to, because of the flexibility of their platform, and Anuta as a company and the team that we worked with as being very outcome focused and very skilled in their work. So I will speak about that a little bit more, I think, as we go forward. Off to you, I think. Matt?
Yep. Hi. So this is Matt Wilson. I'm from Neustar. I suspect a lot of folks haven't really heard of us. We're a company that we have a suite of products that help our customers really guide, grow, and protect their service offerings or their lines of business. I particularly sit on the protect side of the business. On the protect side, we offer a suite of services around DDoS protection, which is my expertise, and DNS services as well. So both recursive and managed authoritative and recursive DNS. So if you step back several years ago, we were in the process of really kind of transforming our DDoS business. We were going from being a small network that had just a couple terabits of bandwidth with about 4 nodes globally, and a fairly straightforward infrastructure, not overly complex. We made this decision to get ahead of the market, right? We wanted to really differentiate ourselves. We wanted to grow our network. So we went out and we built a 14 node, when we're now at 11 terabits per second, DDoS network. And in the process of doing this, we also kind of rapidly or drastically changed kind of the architecture. We did this in order to be able to enable us to kind of more rapidly support new product development, kind of new forms of connecting with our customers, adding additional features, and that was really the goal of the entire project. Well, one of the things that we identified very, very early on with this is that the scale of this was going to become more problematic. It was one thing when you had, basically, 4 or 5 routers that you were managing across this. You could script a fair amount. It really wasn't overly complex. Well, fast forward to the new architecture where we have multiple vendors. We have multiple vendors, multiple platforms, all the same across all 14 nodes, but kind of different capabilities, different levels of bandwidth in every single node. We needed a more effective way to manage this. And so for us, I think very similar to Peter, this was very much about being able to provide a standardized set of services that were, we could cut down on human error and that we could deploy very quickly. So that's why we looked at a number of solutions. We had scripting as well. We looked at doing more scripting. And for us, one of the things that we really wanted to do was to have something that could maintain the state of the network, right? So I wanted this entire platform to be something that was watching the network, keeping track of what every single device was supposed to be doing, what its configuration was supposed to be looking like, and that could give us the difference between what we expected and what we wanted. And so, as we deployed things, you're talking about deploying things globally, right? So we're talking about having the ability to push changes at a service level. And so when I say a service level, like I want to push a configuration for one customer, or I want to push a brand new customer out to all 14 nodes simultaneously, have the exact same actions take place, and then being able to verify and double check that exactly what got put in there is exactly what I expected. And if not, then I needed to be able to kind of roll back at a very detailed level exactly what happened. And in some cases, I wanted to be able to kind of roll back exactly what happened. We're constantly making changes in the DDoS world. We're always making constant changes to customers. We're, adapting, responding to DDoS attacks, tweaking settings, things like that. We needed the ability to not have to roll back an entire configuration of a router and then reapply only the stuff that I wanted to be in there. I wanted to be able to go back and have the transactional records of exactly what was getting done rolled back. So just that transaction that I might have done 2 hours before or 2 weeks or 2 months before. So we were looking for a solution that would enable us to do that. We looked at all sorts of automation platforms, so like service automation platforms, also, like things like Ansible Tower, things along those lines. For us, they didn't kind of meet what we were looking for because, again, I needed something that sort of natively maintains state. At the same time, kind of about the same time that we were looking and we were starting our deployment, we were starting our implementation of this, Anuta came out with Atom. And so we've been in the process of identifying all the use cases behind the data side of this. Being, very similar to Peter, being on the service provider side of this, having the visibility into what's happening, knowing exactly what's going on in our infrastructure, and being able to do that within the same platform where, we're grabbing all the pieces of data, streaming telemetries, and it really runs the gamut, right? We have log data, we have streaming telemetry, we have a lot of different types of data coming off of our different boxes. And being able to pull that into a platform is really being valuable in assisting our automation, like automated responses. So we're starting to automate some of our responses based on that data.
Yep. Thank you, Matt. That's an excellent overview. Thank you, Peter, as well. I think at this point, let's bring Praveen in, and Praveen, why don't you provide a little more background on Anuta and Atom, and then we'll seg into Matt and Peter talking about their deployment experience.
Sure, Steve. Hi, thanks for joining into the webinar. This is Praveen. I'm VP of Engineering at Anuta Networks. So we've been in business helping large enterprise customers, large SPs, MSPs with their automation and orchestration needs. And the main product that we deliver is Atom. It's a assurance, telemetry, and orchestration for multi-vendor and multi-domain networks. And we actually cater to lots of different domains. It could be data center, it could be MPLS, WAN, core. It's pretty much an open platform that can be deployed in any domain. It is a multi-vendor network, and as we have seen from the descriptions from both Matt and Peter, one is a MSP and other one is an enterprise. So they place different requirements onto the automation platform, and that's actually what we will discuss in the next slide. So if you see on this slide, it just summarizes the major capabilities of Atom, and to cater to these different domains and these domains having different vendors like multiple touch points, and being able to orchestrate a service at a granular level and also at a higher level that is more at a service level. So we need to provide a lot of mechanisms to our customers where we help them describe what they want, and we can help achieve the automation. And apart from being able to automate, we also need to ensure that whatever stays deployed, or whatever is automated stays deployed. That's where we can observe all the configuration changes that are happening in the infrastructure, and we can ensure that any accidental changes can be rolled back. And then on top of it, we will need to look into some of the performance aspects in the infrastructure and do some baselining and then do some remediation actions. So there are a lot of these end-to-end lifecycle events that has to be taken care. And at the same time, since this automation software is going to be in the main path of the business, right? This is a main business enabler now. The software itself has to be highly resilient. The software has to scale. The software has to be open. It has to provide APIs so that we can tie into the different ecosystem partners out there. And ecosystem integration is fairly important because we do not expect ourselves like Atom to be doing everything out there. We're going to be required to integrate into like IP address management solutions. We're going to be integrated into NMS solutions, SDN controllers, SD-WAN controllers. And towards that aspect, it's very, very important for the platform to be open. It should be able to seamlessly integrate into multiple different endpoints. So that all becomes imperative for the software. So if you see from left to right, the life cycle starts from pretty much onboarding a device, being able to understand what the device capabilities are, being able to seed the device, that infrastructure element with configuration. Even doing some of the routine maintenance activities like image management is something that we provide in Atom. And then once the devices are onboarded, we take care of the day 1 to day n activities, like being able to deploy services, and that could be services that are one-time services like SNMP refresh, or maybe a security patch, like a one-time activities. That's more stateless activities. Or we can have scenarios that are stateful. Both Peter and Matt have described some services that are more stateful in nature, where they onboard their external customer, they push a service, and the service has a life of its own. In those scenarios, we have a very rich way to declare intent. That's like a Yang model driven service model that can support updates, deletes, and an ongoing maintenance of the service. And these services that we deploy in Atom, they have to be available through API so that not-bound self-service portals can tune it. So that's where we have a very rich API to Atom. And once these services are deployed, we will be constantly tuning into the underlying infrastructure for SNMP traps, syslog, telemetry. And if there are any anomalies that are happening, we can define baselining, we can emit alerts. And then from there, the alerts can be tied into remediation actions. So the alerts in some scenarios can just be emails, or in some scenarios they can be posted as notes on a Slack channel. But eventually, sometimes some of the alerts may need to trigger a remediation action that could be like where we can go on in workflow. And Atom has a very rich workflow engine that's BPMN compliant. It can also support low-code automation, where we can define the mobs. And let's say in this BGP neighbor is flapping, or interface is flapping, interface has high utilization, I want to steer the traffic to a secondary link. All those kinds of remediation actions can be defined, and Atom can take care of doing that fairly well. All in all, it's a highly scalable, open, and customizable platform. And as we saw, right, there are multiple vendors at play in both customer scenarios, and different kinds of activities. One is a networking device like NMS solutions, SD-WAN solutions. We've been fairly successful in catering to the diverse deployment options, like single site, like across multiple geographic locations. Also, we have done that, and that's about where I would like to pause.
Yeah, so with that background on Anuta and Atom, let's turn it over to Matt again and let Matt talk about some of his actual deployment experience.
Yeah, so for us, when we started down this process, one of the things that we identified pretty quickly was that we really needed the ability to have this entire platform be very, very fault tolerant, right? We're talking about nodes all over the world. We're talking about nodes, just there's a fair amount of latency between certain nodes. So we kind of chose a model that was a bit of a multi-tiered model, where we had agents in every single node, as well as multiple platforms on the back end, because we needed the redundancy on the back end. We had multiple redundant agents in each node, kind of being able to talk to these. So that way we had a fair amount of failover and resiliency. One of the things that we also realized is we were kind of engineering some of this a little bit on the fly. So we stepped back when we first started with Anuta. We stepped back and realized we needed to better identify what we were looking for. So where he talked about where we have the Yang modeling, we had to sit down and better understand exactly what each service model needed to look like. So service model is kind of what the Yang modeling is. So we had to understand what a service model was. So we sat down and we did a big analysis in our infrastructure to say, what are the granular steps we take? What are some of the things we choose to do? We identified the most critical ones for us that were, in order to kind of enable us to go to market, what we wanted to do. And then we had a big list of kind of future items that we wanted to do as well. And so we've prioritized and gone out and worked on all these kind of first priority ones. Anuta's been great working with us to tweak those as we go. We kind of identify that, maybe sometimes our requirements weren't the most clear or weren't the most well-defined. So we'd sit back and we'd tweak it, using the professional services. We've, been able to fix some of the kind of the little nuances as we move forward. And frankly, as we change our services, we have to tweak these things as we change our services just a little bit. So it's been a very valuable tool for us. It's kind of, we're able to use it as an ad hoc tool for the SOC. So while we wrote service models for some of the most critical and important things that we knew we needed as part of our model, we've also, we've worked with them to, we're using some of just the direct ad hoc type of tooling where, we have like some basic APIs and UIs around access to certain devices that has also proven to be really, really valuable. And we're just really starting to hit the tip of the iceberg on the telemetry and the analytics side of this as well. But all in all, it's been a pretty pleasant experience. And it's not without its complexities, as you can imagine anything like this is. But, they make it pretty easy to work with. And just straight out of the bat, like the deployment was pretty straightforward. We got it up, we got it testing in our lab. We have a kind of a full lab for everything that we do. And so we got it up working in the lab. We're able to simulate some of the long distance and make sure that we're handling high latency connections, failover type of scenarios. But yeah, I mean, for us, the deployment has been, we were able to identify the stuff very early on and kind of move that forward. So,
Matt, yeah, thanks, Matt. We'll talk a little bit more about kind of what you learned from this whole experience shortly. Let's flip it over to Peter and let him talk about his deployment experience next.
Yeah, certainly. From our requirements and wish list onset, it was all about us being able to automate the delivery of CPEs in service activation and doing so in greenfield and brownfield scenarios with zero-touch provisioning, backend OSS integration, scalability, as we are a service provider with thousands of customer sites deployed, or tens of thousands, I should say, and then have the ability of, to verify the work that has happened and also discover aberrations and failures and so forth. And as Matt also pointed out, to have the ability to roll back in scenarios where failures arise and do that in a granular fashion so that we know what went wrong during a migration or during a customer onboarding, with the ability to basically stop either the transactions or roll them back on only the devices that failed or on the entire network, depending on how we assess the impact of that. So auto discovery was also a key piece for us because we needed that for our brownfield scenarios. We needed to basically read all the configs and do a true up on what should be there, what is there, and needed to make sure that we have the deploy and rollback at scale. have all transaction logged for auditing from an auditing perspective. Again, we have to as a service provider prove to our customers as well to to maintain internally integrity of our services and ensure that no unauthorized access happens. That also then led to the need to detect actually out of process changes, so that we can get alarms on that and roll that back if changes were made, possibly during a troubleshooting through CLI, so that then either accepted in the system what's on record with Anuta, or push the previous configuration back on the device after alterations were made. So these were all automated and tied to escalations internally. So our other criteria was to cut down the provisioning time. Zero touch comes into that, but also provisioning times in general, from complex scripting and individual configuration push, rework, etc. So our modest goal was to get below 20 minutes per device. In reality, once we actually did the Anuta onboarding, we came out at 5 minutes on average, and that's a number that still holds true. On occasion, it's even faster, and that has to do with the ability to get it first time right. So there's little rework, and also to model the scripts. It's very intuitive once you start working on it and building it, and have the ability to configure them so that we can tailor them and simplify them enough to roll them out on an entire network. We also wanted to cut well, we had a very strict timeline when we started that out, because we had, during the screening and when working with different vendors, invested a lot of time, and we had large pressing projects coming our way that were coming to close, and we wanted to make sure that we can deliver the entire platform as per our requirements within 90 days. Hands down, Anuta beat that. We were ready, up and running in about 51 or 2 days. Give or take, right? So that's calendar days, I'm saying. So that was absolutely stunning, and that was only because the team had started working already on the setup during our negotiations, and began strategizing as we first engaged with them. So that was a very nice delivery, and then subsequently also any additional work that has been executed was also quite bang on time and always to our satisfaction. So we had very little rework even on the deployment side. So last but not least, we ended up as an example. So what did all that do? It simplified our lives on the service delivery side, and allows us now to look forward and integrate more into the rest of the system, to have the integration with our backend systems, with our inventory, with the IPAM, for example, with the portal services, and with our FMS and PMS systems, and on a per user level, right? So that means for our customers, we have multiple customers that we service, and these customers see the feeds that are relevant to them. So, and we are able to build that on the Anuta platform with relative ease. Last but not least, the example that I want to throw out is a customer deployment where we had I think about 150 site greenfield deployment that we did with a networking customer of ours, where we were able to basically push all the configurations in a single, once the devices were deployed on site, in a single push in 18 hours, or so in 2 phases, essentially, to bring the devices up and running and integrate them and get them ready for service. So that's something that would have otherwise cost us over 100 some engineering hours, with probably rework, etc. So it would have been a much more difficult project for us prior to our orchestration through Anuta.
Peter, is there anything you'd add in terms of lessons learned through all of this process?
Well, yeah, okay, so there are a couple, right? So one is definitely choose your vendor wisely. Don't be, don't be taken aback or too cautious because it's a smaller company or a new company. It pays off if you do the right choice, right? It pays off in flexibility and agility and quality of work that comes out of it. So do your due diligence early, both on the vendor side as well as on the details of what you're trying to achieve, because there are lots of promises out there on automation platforms, lots of slideware, I wanted to say. So people put a lot of things and capabilities on slides, but it's it's really down to make sure that those are capabilities they can really build, and not for a $2 million project plan, right, with professional services, etc., because it's all tailor-made in the end to you. So that would be my suggestion. And ready the team to work with Yang, which I think probably now on the networking side we have crossed that chasm and people are quite familiar with it, but definitely that's it's a necessity for anything we're going to do going forward in networking.
Great. Hey Matt, how about yourself? I mean, what would you add in terms of lessons learned from this whole process?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things that we figured out is you need to sit down and really think through the problems that you're trying to solve. Not at a kind of a really simplistic level of like, I need automation, but truly, what is it you're trying to solve? What are the limitations of the team that you have in hand that are going to be expected to use these things? Because doing that sort of analysis is what really drove us towards this type of orchestration solution, as opposed to just like kind of the standard scripting that we are headed towards. Once you kind of understand the true problems that you're trying to solve, you need to get very, very granular about how you solve that. What are the steps? What do these models need to look like? And what sort of data do you want? How frequently do you want it? And what would be the ultimate response? It's really critical to try to think about what that roadmap might look like within your own organization of, I'm starting here, here's the baby steps I can take, but ultimately this is where it's going to get us, right? Because if you're not thinking really long-term, for us, this is what drove us to this type of solution, was thinking where we wanted to be in 2 to 3 years, understanding that, we're going to, there's maybe slightly easier ways to start right away, but that growth and the capabilities would have really stopped within about a few months. And it didn't ultimately solve the long-term issue that we were trying to shoot for.
Great. Well, thank you, Peter, and thank you, Matt. I'd like to, I think at this point, turn it back over to Praveen to kind of provide a kind of a summary and final kind of perspective on the Atom solution. Move to the next slide, please. Great.
Yeah, as we learn from the problems and how both Matt and Peter alluded to, we're looking at a requirement where it has to be a platform approach. It cannot be a cookie cutter kind of solution. It has to cater to different kinds of use cases. It has to scale. There are going to be multiple vendors, different kinds of endpoints. There could be devices. There could be IP address management solutions, NMS systems. There could be lots of different things, including some of the endpoints being deployed on premises versus on a public cloud or private cloud. So, and all of this, where we have to go do both config discovery. We have to understand what configurations are deployed in a brownfield environment. We have to do reporting. We have to do remediation. We have to do assurance, automation. All of these things come into picture, and all in while ensuring that we are an open platform. We provide APIs. That has to also come in. So Atom delivers on all of these all of these requirements and all of these promises. And again, we are looking at two customers that are fairly disparate. One is a MSP catering to their end enterprise customers, where the equipment is owned by the end enterprise, and Tata Communications is providing managed services. The other is a enterprise which is behaving like a service provider, but again, it's a slightly different scenario. And we've been fairly successful to cater to two distinct requirements. And yeah, we're happy to update the team on this one.
Great, thank you. I think we've come to the point here, if you go to the next slide, I think we've come to the point here where we can do some Q&A. So if anyone has questions for Praveen or Matt or Peter, you can basically go to your Zoom dashboard or client and click on Q&A and enter your question. And we'll try to get those teed up. You know, one thing I wanted to ask, I guess, Praveen, this would be one for you. You know, you talked about multi-vendor support. You mentioned you support kind of a wide range of vendors there. I think it was 45 on that last slide. But if you currently don't support a vendor, you know, what's the process and how long does it take for you to incorporate support into your platform?
So typically it takes anywhere from 2 weeks to 4 weeks, depending on the type of vendor or the type of equipment we're looking at. And in some scenarios, we have our customers doing it for themselves. Our SDK provides complete access to our customers to do it, or our SI partners to do it as well. So we are fairly flexible in that regard, Steve.
Great. Another question, you know, in terms of the Atom deployment itself, you know, what type of underlying infrastructure is required? Do you need, you know, for instance, do you need Kubernetes to operate Atom?
Right. Yeah. So to provide the fault tolerance and deployment, like rolling upgrades and some of those advanced capabilities to provide high uptime, resiliency, horizontal scale, and fault isolation, right? We had to go with a Dockerized environment where Kubernetes is required. And for the remote collector nodes that are going to be deployed closer to on-premises, we have situations where Kubernetes is not mandatory for the remote nodes, but for the central infrastructure, we do expect the software to be deployed on a Kubernetes-based platform, Steve.
And the reason for that is primarily issues dealing with kind of scale and resiliency?
Scale and resiliency and like rolling upgrades are typically the use cases, Steve. Great.
I think another question related to kind of software-defined networking and SD-WANs, you know, if you're in an environment where the customer already has a SD-WAN solution deployed and a specific controller as part of that operation, you know, essentially what level of automation does that provide, and, you know, how does Atom fit in there? Would I still need to deploy Atom in that environment?
Right. So we do have scenarios where the end-to-end orchestration is going to require like doing some IP address management in some scenarios. So it's not that the SDN or SD-WAN controllers cannot do it. It's just about from an overall process point of view. There is more than just automation of the endpoint. There's going to be a lot of resource reservation, some of the bookkeeping that we have to do. Like sometimes we have to mediate between ServiceNow. And in some scenarios, our customers actually have multiple SD-WAN controllers. And we cannot have a not-bound self-service portal like directly making API calls into different of these endpoints. So that's where we provide the mediation between the SD-WAN controllers or SDN controllers and the self-service portals. And we have done integrations into these controllers already. And we do see the need, and our customers also agree with this so far, Steve.
Great. Do you integrate with ServiceNow?
Yes, we do, especially on the service catalog front. Typically, that's when they expect the not bound or some of the clients invoking the services. That's a typical area where we are expected to integrate, and we have done that integration already.
Okay. And with respect to, you know, pricing, what's the pricing model for an Atom solution? You know, essentially, what are the key drivers for dimensioning and pricing?
So pricing model is based on the number of devices, and it's fairly simple in that sense. It doesn't matter what type of a device it is, but it's just number of devices and then what features you want to use within Atom, like orchestration or telemetry, right? So a couple of big building blocks there, and it just those two combinations decide the price.
And let me circle back with both Peter and Matt here. So and I think you both alluded to this, but I guess I'll start with Peter. What do you envision sort of as next steps in the process for you at Tata with Anuta and Adam?
Yeah. Okay. So we have incrementally implemented additional features along the way since our first use cases and deployments. We intend to have, basically all of our managed CPE services ultimately discovered and managed through Anuta. And so that's a scale piece. We are looking currently at the options to use Anuta also for multi SD-WAN vendor integration. So something that was addressed just now by Praveen as well, right? So those are the things that we look, and also to basically build around it or integration with other services that we have to have a fully automated delivery and activation integration with the rest of the systems that are not yet rolled in, like IP address management and so forth, so that we can ultimately deliver devices and instances, I should say, because I think I forgot to mention that we also deploy on cloud and instances with basically an automated process end to end till service activation.
Thank you, Peter. Matt, how about yourself? What do you see as being next steps?
Yeah, so for us, we're actually experimenting. I'd sort of call it like an SD-WAN or a like SDN sort of light, if you will, where we're doing a lot of kind of custom things on the routing side of things, and taking a lot of the complexities of how you provide a DDoS service off of the devices. Now, as we're doing that, what we're really looking at is, okay, how do I integrate that with the management capabilities and the analytics that I can get out of Anuta? And so how do I kind of blend these things together? What did those type of interactions look like? What makes sense for us to automate? What makes sense more to notify? And really starting to work through a lot of the next step type of operational integration of both the SDN side of this and the kind of the config management, orchestration, and analytics that Anuta gives us.
Great. So sort of a question maybe for all three of you. Maybe you might want to each provide your perspective on this, but if you had to kind of compare and contrast Anuta and Adam with, the competitive alternatives, whether those are solutions from other vendors or, open source software solutions, really, how do you kind of stack up Anuta and Adam against those alternatives? And that could be on a feature basis, it could be on a kind of performance and scale basis, or even could be on a kind of a pricing model basis. And maybe Praveen, you want to go first, but I'd also be interested in hearing Matt and Peter's perspective on that.
Sure. So Anuta Atom is a truly multi-vendor platform. And along with it, we also do pretty much all the end-to-end scenarios. Like we don't ask our customers to go and deploy a different product for workflow, different product for telemetry, different product for orchestration, right? So in that sense, we are a much more integrated platform and a much more multi-vendor. We are also a bit futuristic in the sense that we provide fault tolerance. Our software itself is Dockerized microservices based. So in that sense, yeah, we have some competition in specific areas, but broadly we are a much more integrated platform for the complex deployments, Steve.
Yeah, Peter or Matt, I mean, you obviously made a decision. Just be curious how you'd respond.
Yeah, I think Praveen has already touched on that. So I think the vendor independence is also important, and true support, right? Unbiased support for a set of multi vendors in the process is key in our environment, right? Because many of the competitors are aligned with one or other vendor solution, and then while using open standards, not really implementing all components in an open and transparent fashion, and requiring certifications from third-party vendors, etc., which is not something required in Anuta. And Anuta has taken on a lot of that work for us in general. So so again, without any restrictions on what vendors we can onboard, or making life for everybody difficult in the process.
Matt, anything you would add?
No, I mean, I think we were pretty similar. We looked at a lot of the different vendor-specific stuff, the platforms that were out there. We looked at some things like Open Daylight. We looked at a number of different types of solutions for this, and it was the true multi-vendor support. I mean, the whole idea that, I mean, if it's something that you can log into and issue commands, or has an API, or has any mechanism by which you can push configurations to it, Anuta can interact with it. And for us, that was exceptionally powerful, because we knew going forward, as we grew our platform and as we added services and added capabilities, we didn't want to be hamstrung by the decisions that we had made 3 years back about, well, this is our management platform, so we're kind of stuck implementing certain solutions that play well in that environment. With Anuta, we don't really have to consider that, right? We know it's a proper, fully vendor agnostic type of solution that can interact with pretty much any vendor that you have. And that was super powerful for us, right? Because we were moving this service along, building this new DDoS platform. We knew we were going to be adding new things. We were going to add new vendors to this. So it was really powerful for us to have that flexibility, setting us up for future flexibility from day one.
Excellent. Well, I think at this point, I'd like to thank both Peter and Matt for their contributions here. This has been a great perspective on automation in general, and Anuta Atom in particular. Why don't we move to the next slide here, Praveen, and we can wrap this up here.
Hey, yeah. So further information on Atom, some of the case studies, you can find these at these URLs. And you can always reach out to info@anutanetworks.com for further information, and we're also on LinkedIn.
Great. And if you go to the next slide. So we have our ONUG Spring 2019 event coming up here shortly, actually, just in a couple of weeks or so down in Dallas. And so you can come to the conference and meet with Anuta Networks there, and also participate in the event. There's a way to register here for a 30% discount if you follow that link. And I find the ONUG events to be very stimulating environment if you're in the position of looking how you migrate your applications, your infrastructure from kind of the world we've all gotten comfortable living in for the last maybe 10 or 20 years to this new world of kind of hybrid multi-cloud deployments. So it's a great event in that respect, as you can kind of interact with your peers, and essentially it's a good way to get kind of take the pulse of the industry, and what the current state of the art is, and who the leading vendors are in terms of implementing solutions along these lines. So I think with that, we've kind of come to the end of today's program. Again, you can circle back with the folks at Anuta if you have more questions or interest in their products and solutions. And again, I'd like to thank Praveen, Matt, and Peter for today's event. Thank you all.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.